Real people. Real music. Radio Caroline.
It's noon. 30 years ago this weekend, our radio ship Mi Amigo finally succumbed to the inevitable and sank. I caught up with Caroline man Tom Anderson for a first-hand account of the drama. Now, Tom, as a Caroline presenter in the 1970s aboard the Mi Amigo, did the condition of the ship give you any concerns?
The first time that I was aware that the ship was possibly worse than I'd thought, I did leak, and that there were holes in the underneath part of the ship, in the bottom of the hull. Yeah, I suppose it did worry me a little bit, but I was the skinny enough one to go into the bilges, and so offered to do it, and went in, and you very soon got used to it. You used to crawl into the bilges and you'd found a spurt of water, and it would be a very, very fine jet. You couldn't really see where it was coming from, so you'd go in locally, and you could see phosphorescence through the bottom of the ship, a bit like looking through a colander. We worked out a way of mending this with concrete and using boxes fabricated between the ribs of the ship and making concrete patches that were braced against the next level of floor above it and what have you. But the first thing to do, because the pressure of the water coming through in a fine jet would have just gone straight through the concrete, the first thing to do was to make the hole bigger. Because if you have a bigger hole, there's not so much pressure for the water to actually spurt everywhere. It comes in a more organised flow, and the boxes should therefore contain the concrete, which was special concrete to be made with seawater. And the first thing you've got to do is make the hole bigger, which is a bit scary, I suppose, a bit freaky, but you don't actually think about it. You just get on and do it. Once you've done it once, it makes no difference. You just go down and bang a bigger hole in the bottom of the ship, and so you can actually see the hole then, and, you might have a hole that's a couple of inches round instead of a pinprick to start with. But then at least you know you're bracing against stronger metal, because if you were bracing against a piece that was wafer thin, your prop that was initially holding the patch on, you used to put a plywood patch, a piece of neoprene rubber first, then a plywood patch, then a big bracing stick that would brace to the next level up, which would essentially stop the flow, and then build a box around it and fill it with concrete.
How much of the original ship was actually left then? Was it mostly filler?
No is the answer. No, it wasn't. I mean, the holes took a line, a pattern, and we worked it out once. I was talking to James Kay, as he was known then, about the pattern these holes took, and we worked it out. It was something to do with electrolysis and distance from the water line and what have you, and they formed a line, 2 lines either side of the keel going down the ship. The centre section of underneath the cabin area and the Caroline studios downstairs had already been filled with concrete a long, long time ago. So I don't know how much of the original hull was left underneath there, or how much, if there was indeed any. There may have been just flaky bits of sort of rusty metal falling off all the time. We never knew, never saw it out of the water. The parts that I was involved in were the parts where there wasn't any concrete, so you could actually get to the inside of the metal. And no, to be honest, they weren't. They were small perforations that used to appear. And having in later years sort of seen surveys done on metal ships, you can see how isolated it actually is. You can have one plate, there's a hole, there is actually a hole you can see through, and a plate 6 inches, 8 inches away from that will be giving you a reading of 3 or 4 millimetres thick or something. So I mean, it's very isolated. Now
we come to the big question. The events of March the 19th, 1980. Can you describe them, please?
Yeah, it was a really quite a strange one, because we'd been left on board, just 4 of us, due to a tender changeover that had not quite gone wrong, but the timing wasn't quite right. At that point, we'd used 2 ships to bring supplies out, one to take the off-going crew off, and the other one to bring the supplies and the new people out, so that whatever happened, they couldn't be following one. It was cat and mouse time with the authorities, basically. And we'd been left between ships, and the storm blew up. 4 of us on board. None of us were officially crew. We were all broadcast staff. 3 English, and 1 Dutch guy who had been on there for a matter of days when the whole thing went wrong. Now, I went to bed as usual, sort of at the end of the night, and then would have been normally sleeping through till midday. and I was woken up with a knock on the door from a very worried-sounding Dutchman saying, Tom, I think there's something outside the door that shouldn't be there. What are you talking about? You know, it's, yeah, okay, I'll get up. So I got up and went up, and I opened the door onto the side deck, and a matter of, I suppose it was 50, 100 metres away, was one of the old wartime beacons, the old triangular lattice tower things, radio beacons. And it should have been a number of miles away from us. So, okay, we've broken the anchor chain. We are drifting onto the Coast Guards, try and get our position, find out what the position is. They asked if we wanted help, and we said, no, we're okay. We'll lower the spare anchor. We're not in any danger. They insisted on sending the lifeboat. We tried to say it's not necessary, and the lifeboat came, and it hung around, and it circled us, and went and sat off, and the weather was pretty stormy. Although I think possibly the worst of the storm maybe had subsided. I don't know. It blew up at the very tail end when they tried to take us off. And we carried on broadcasting, and we were just waiting for the other boat to come. You know, and it didn't, because we had pumps running. We were keeping control of everything. We must have sprung another leak. As far as we know, the ship had sat on the anchor chain on the sandbank, on the remains of the anchor chain. And I think the spare anchor had basically held, and that we couldn't have drifted off that. And we were being banged on the bottom, on the sandbank, with what we believed to be the chain underneath it. As the tide lowered, we were banging more heavily. I'm not really aware of whether it was high tide, low tide, or whatever, because you never saw the sandbanks. We didn't have a depth sounder or anything to find out. But we appeared to be taking more water. And we hung on until such point that it was very obvious that within a few hours it would have reached the generators. We weren't keeping control of the water. It was increasing rather than decreasing. Now, if it had hit the generators, we would have lost a large percentage of the pumping ability we had. Most of them being electrically driven. We did have some independent pumps, but not enough to keep pace with the water ingress. At which point we agreed that we would leave the ship. It was something we didn't want to do. The lifeboat had said they tried to put a line on the back of the ship to take our bags off and take us off on a breeches buoy system, but it was too rough and too dangerous for them to come so close to the ship on the sandbank. They may well have been banged on the sandbank themselves or seriously damaged trying to get alongside the ship. So that was abandoned. The coxswain of the lifeboat, if I remember rightly, his name was Charlie Bowery, I think, but he used to run a pub in Queenborough, and was incidentally given an award for it for the rescue later, said, how many people? 4 people. Right, 4 approaches. You know, to stand on the bulwarks, holding onto one of the stays, and when we say jump, you will jump. Don't do it when you think you can. Wait for the word and just jump. 1, 2, great passes, no problem at all. They didn't touch the ship, safely on board. 3rd one, they got a canary cage, because we weren't going to leave the canary behind. So they had to make 5 passes in the end. I mean, we got a bit of stick from them for doing it, but I think at the end they did understand. And 5 passes later, that was it. We were off the ship and huddled down below in the lifeboat. We were soaking wet, you know. They told us we could bring nothing off with us. We'd stuffed down a few personal belongings down our trousers and inside our jumpers and things like that. Carton of cigarettes and what have you. We were taken below and given a brandy or scotch or something like that and taken into the warm. And they sort of offered to hang around for a little while. And they made a slow progress towards home. And then they told us that the lights had gone out, which obviously meant that the water had hit the generators. We left the tape running, left music running. We signed off. We closed the station down and just left everything running, left it playing, and were taken ashore.
And what were your thoughts at that point? Did you think it was all over?
I think at that instance you probably did, because we knew there'd not been enough money to maintain the Mi Amigo, let alone thinking of buying another ship. But I think enough other people had put radio ships together that probably in the back of one's mind there was hope, at the very least, that we would be doing it again.